Hello and welcome to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast off-season edition. It's been a while since we could say that. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, and going through some off-season stuff. Not totally. Week 18, still here. Some of you sickos out there still might have some championships to play. Not going to completely leave you hanging, but we are in a new era. Just a new season on this podcast. Doing more like 3 per week. Want to take some big picture ideas down the road, and we will get to some of that in this podcast. Basically, today, want to touch on the key top usage takeaways from week 17. Not doing our usual 2-hour spiel on it, but there were a good 10 to 12 things that I believe are worth mentioning. Also want to go through our official PFF Fantasy Football Awards, then round things out with just some quick overall lessons, takeaways from 2021 as it relates to overall fantasy strategy. As always, I'm joined on this edition of the podcast by none other than PFF's own Dwain, the Rock McFarland. Dwain, 17 weeks are down. Week 18, man. Happy week 18.
I know. I still haven't won a Millie Maker, so I have one more week, Ian. No. No, man. I'm excited. Like, this is my first, like we were just talking about before the show came on, like the off season is like, my brain is like morphing into this new mode. Like, I'm really excited. I have a huge list of things I want to research and things I want to jump into. But like, we've been in such a groove for so long. It feels kind of weird trying to come out of it.
It does, man. 16 straight Sundays of just, sun up to sundown, nothing but watching football and stuff. I think I texted you at like 12:45 this past Sunday. I was like, Dwayne, I'm already 3 beers deep. Life is good as a normal person for a change. So we're going to try to, I have not been drinking today. We got some work to do on this podcast. Again, we're going to start things off with some key takeaways from week 17. Dwayne and I have gone through the snaps, the notes, and just identified some key situations that, DFS, week 18 fantasy finals, just being fans of the game, you should probably know about. So, Dwayne, let's kick things off with a situation in Buffalo where, we had Emmanuel Sanders out with the knee. Gabriel Davis took his spot. Stephon Diggs is doing his thing. Expected. What was not expected was Cole Beasley being healthy enough to get off the COVID list, come back and play, and not get his usual rollback. He actually only played 49% of the offensive snaps. Isaiah McKenzie was in there for 32%. Shout out to the artist formerly known as RotoWorld, NBC Sports Edge, whatever you want to call him, for pointing out that McKenzie actually outsnapped Beasley 8-1 in goal-to-go situations. So, Dwayne, when I see that original snap split, my first thought is like, okay, Beasley first came off COVID. We've seen multiple players around the league kind of get eased back into action. But seeing the red zone usage makes me wonder if this could actually be a more cemented change in this usage going ahead into the playoffs. Is that what you're thinking here, or am I maybe looking a little bit too much into just a 1-week sample?
My guess is it's just the 1 week. I think they had multiple guys that just, were coming back from COVID. You're trying to get back into a groove, and we've seen what that's done, to folks. So my guess is we'll see Beasley really more in his normal role. I mean, I would hope that we would see more McKenzie, but to be honest, if McKenzie's just going to have a role like that, it doesn't help anyone. Like, we can't use Isaiah McKenzie, for like if you're doing like a playoff best ball type thing, or if you're doing, if you just want to play DFS during the playoffs, makes it tough to use either one of those players. So we kind of need one or the other to have the role. My guess is it still will be Beasley. I'm just going to lean to the guy we know has been the starter. But yeah, it is an interesting split.
Bills can save about $6 million against the cap if they choose to move on from Beasley this offseason. I haven't taken a look about Isaiah McKenzie's contract, but we do know it's far less than $6K. Beasley turns 33 in April. This could be one of those situations, Dwayne, where if we do see the Bills move on from Beasley, McKenzie's going to be everyone's favorite offseason sleeper that's going to be ranked too low, but he probably will be ranked far too low. Might be a decent idea to take a few late round best ball stabs at him, at least in the winter.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's a situation where, look, you've got a pass first offense. We've seen McKenzie, flash multiple times now when we've had Beasley out. So it's not like we're just looking at one data point. So yeah, I think it's one of those situations where if you can embrace it early on while there's more unknown, it can be something that pays off. That's one of those situations where it's like, hey, let's lean into the variance, especially in like a best ball type format. Not that you want to use that, as your strategy for every type of fantasy football, but if you're going to play early, this is what I tell people. If you're going to draft early, draft the players in these types of situations where their price is eventually going to move one way or the other. It could go the wrong way on you, but if you're trying to capture upside, I mean, that's really the goal, is to get things for as cheap as you can.
Moving on, another interesting wide receiver room. We have the Rams, first of all, without Henderson, without Cam Akers, Sony Michel, 98% snaps, truly like the most used running back in the NFL right now. But the real interesting takeaway was what was going on at wide receiver. Cooper Kupp, the god, fantasy MVP, whatever you want to call him, 100% snaps, that makes sense. Although Beckham, 98% snaps, we know he's pretty much cemented himself as the number 2 pass game option in LA. But Dwain, what was interesting was we had Van Jefferson all the way down at 53% snaps because he was essentially splitting things down the middle with Ben Skowronek. I think I got it. Something like that. Seventh.
This is the part where in radio, like you just lay out, you let the other host drown.
we'll just roll with that. 7th round rookie. So we've seen Ben step up for a few weeks this year, but I mean, prior to this one, even, the last time we actually saw him play even more than 32% of the offensive snaps was that original game with OBJ against the Rams, where obviously I think Beckham played like 10 or 15 total snaps in that one. So really this usage in a game that was tight the whole way, unless we're missing an injury to Van Jefferson, kind of came out of nowhere. I'm not saying Jefferson was like more than kind of a low-ish floor wide receiver 3 before this happened, but Dwain, it's not good, I guess, really moving forward and looking ahead to what this 3 wide receiver core could be moving on to next year. Jefferson's had, chances really left and right, seeing Woods go down. Tutu Atwell was drafted in the 2nd round. He got hurt, he's been out. It's not good for Van Jefferson's future that he is now, again, losing snaps to a guy's name that it's week 18. I can't even come close to pronouncing.
Right. I mean, you would want him just to go ahead and keep this role, which we had seen him at 100%, of the routes. He did look like he got dinged up.
Okay.
But it wasn't until the 4th quarter, might have been late 3rd, but it was when Sony Michel was on a running play, and it looked like, he may have injured himself on that play. But the problem is this was really a rotation that started well before that. Like, this started in the 1st quarter. Now, it was Van Jefferson actually leading the way. Jefferson was in a route 64% of the dropbacks through the 3rd quarter. And so I'm just looking at my notes again. So it was the 4th quarter where the injury happened. So in the 4th quarter, it was 100% Skowronek, if that's how you say it. And Jefferson.
You don't know either? You don't know either. Unbelievable.
No, I don't. No, Jefferson was not out there. Dude, I'm telling you, like, I guess I've never had a reason to need to listen to any game unless it's like the Cowboys game, and I just do. And I don't actually a lot of times with that either, but just to listen to the announcer, and plus when I go back and watch games, I use the all 22, not the, I don't use the broadcast version. So I guess I've got to figure out how to do that again. But anyway, so it was more of a rotation even before the 4th quarter when Jefferson didn't play at all. So at first I thought, well, man, maybe it was just an injury thing, but it wasn't. It was actually something that looked like they wanted to do earlier in the game. And when you look at Jefferson, really, he's been good, as far as a down the field target. But really where they're using, Bennett is underneath. They're using him in the slot. So he's really more of that low A-dot, slot kind of guy, Z receiver, flanker, if you will. Whereas whenever you look at what they're doing with Jefferson, they really want him to play outside and stretch the field vertically more in that X position or split in.
Staying with the wide receivers, unfortunate news in Dallas. Michael Gallup caught a sick contested touchdown, as he's known to do. Unfortunately, tore his ACL on the play. Apparently, even tore it before he went up and made the catch, which made the whole situation that much more amazing. Prayers up that Gallup gets fully healthy ahead of a free agency period where everyone is expecting him to get paid, assuming he's 100%. Same thing with Chris Godwin. Now, Dwain, the ramification of this, something that, I remember you were bringing up as early as week 1 after Gallup got hurt, was that CeeDee Lamb, when used as the Cowboys' primary slot receiver, which he was from weeks 13 to 16, more snaps in the slot than out wide. That changed in week 17 when Michael Gallup's out of the picture. Obviously, this Cowboys offense wants to have all 3 of their sub-wide receivers healthy, but just in terms of CeeDee Lamb's personal case, losing Michael Gallup opens up a lot more opportunities for him.
Yeah, because he was coming off the field in 12 personnel because it was really Gallup, and then they had Amari Cooper out there in those situations. So, look, a lot of times in 12 personnel, you're running the ball anyway. You're not throwing the ball as often. So it's not a huge deal, but every time we can have a player on the field, because think, the quarterback comes up to the line, they're checking everything. All of a sudden they're like, oh, I see that, they're loading the box. We're going to throw. Well, CD didn't get to be on the field whenever that adjustment happened. And so those can often lead to big plays. So it does matter. And so, last week you saw CeeDee Lamb's routes jump from in week 15, 71%, week 16, 81%, last week up to 92%. If you go back and look at the games without Gallup, he was over 90% pretty much every week. So it's going to be wheels up for Lamb. You know, if you're doing any type of playoff best ball formats, you know, Lamb's going to be one of the favorites in that anyway, but now you're going to get even that much more juice out of CeeDee Lamb.
Hasn't been quite the second half we thought it'd be for CeeDee, but we've seen the dude when he's on. You know, wouldn't be shocked at all. If the Cowboys are going to make a nice run here, CeeDee's going to need to be a major part of that offense. Final real point.
Lamb's an interesting player because, and he's a guy I really want to go back and watch again more, you know, because I've watched him within the context of games, but really like studying him. It's interesting. Like, he's not the main guy when they see man coverage. So I don't know if that's something to do with him or something the way they've designed the offense. Like, he gets more targets whenever they're in zone coverage. And so really it's been more Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup. 27% targets per route run for Michael Gallup. And a lot of that is when Dak sees he's got a single on the outside and they want to go for a chunk play, he will throw it up to Gallup. And they don't really treat CeeDee that same way, right? They try to get him more the ball in space, underneath. Not that he doesn't ever go deep, but it seems like really they look at him as being more of this player they want to get the ball to on the run, right? And let him on the draggers, the crossers, the slants, things like that. So he's a guy I want to dig into more. But right now I'm kind of worried, like, is Lamb at this point in his career really more of a limited route tree type of guy? Now, sometimes, again, that can be scheme and coaching, not necessarily just on the player.
And let's remember, CeeDee Lamb, still just 22 years old, doesn't turn 23 until April. Dwain, we were talking about the Cole Beasley cap hit. Don't look now. The Cowboys are locked into Zeke for, it looks like, at least another year. But that Amari Cooper contract was really more of a 2-year deal. If they decide to cut Cooper before June 1st next year, they can save $16 million against the cap. I'm not saying, you know, I think all 32 offenses are better off with Amari Cooper than without. But if we take Cooper and Gallup out of the equation here, maybe they think Cedric Wilson's a fine enough wide receiver 3, use a top 100 pick to go get a number wide receiver 2. I mean, if you take away Cooper and Gallup from the equation, man, I think we're going to be hard-pressed to rank more than 5 receivers ahead of CeeDee in 2022.
Yeah, I think we're going to struggle probably with that anyway, just because it's an explosive offense and we're going to be looking for him to take that next step forward. It's not like he's been bad, right? It's really, honestly, it's just when you look around, you see the things Jamar Chase and some of these other young receivers are doing, like that's also part of the equation in the way our brains work. But yeah, like if that were to happen and they were to move on from both of those receivers, I doubt they'd do that. But you're right, it's potential, and that's what we're talking about now is off season. If that were to happen, yeah, Lamb would instantly be top 5 wide receiver.
2 more wide receiver situations we want to touch on. First is in Tampa Bay. So looking at what happened, I think we all saw Antonio Brown have a bit of a mental issue, leave that game. We're still waiting to see if he's actually going to be cut or if Tom Brady and company are going to do enough to keep him around. So AB stuff aside, looking at what kind of happened after that, incident, Mike Evans leading the way, 76% snaps, even though he was playing through the pain of a hamstring. Behind him, we had Tyler Johnson continuing to work as the full-time slot without Chris Godwin. But look at Cyril Grayson coming in strong, working ahead of Brashad Perriman, working ahead of Scotty Miller, and really emerging as the number 3 in this offense. That's great, Dwain. But let's face it, we saw this when AB was out there. Brady, and we saw Tyler Johnson 2 weeks ago get goose-egged. Brady is not the type of quarterback that's necessarily going to treat, Chris Godwin's backup like Chris Godwin. We might be in for, 4 or 5 straight weeks of the Rob Gronkowski, Mike Evans getting fed all the targets they can handle show.
Yeah, I think the biggest adjustment here is you're just going to have a target funnel for Evans and Gronkowski. So, if you look at Evans this year, like he's wide receiver 12 and like he's only gotten 16% of the targets for the team. So like he could easily double that until the Bucs are knocked out, or if they go to the Super Bowl, like he could easily be at 30%. You could also see Gronk at 30%. Gronk this last week actually did lead the team with 21% of the targets. He was at 20% in week 15. And Gronk's really the highest guy on the team when it comes to targets per route run. We had a long stretch without Gronk, but at 22%. So they're going to both get fed. I do like Grayson just because like he's number 1, his targets per route run is the best of the guys that remain. And that's where a stat like this comes in handy, right? We've got all these different mishmashes of games where different guys have been in for different periods of time. They've been in and out of lineups based on guys getting injured in game, things like that. And when you look at Grayson, I mean, the 18% is encouraging. And then the other thing is just, his track record. I mean, came in the league in 2017, didn't play college football. He was really a track star from LSU. And so you could see it taking someone like this time, right, to get to where they are. All we know about him is that he's a world-class athlete, and he's finally getting his opportunity. So no better player to get that with, right, than Tom Brady. And so he has come up in 2 games now and made some plays for Brady. So, I mean, I think there is something potentially there. I do like him, as an option right now. If you're drafting, some of these things on Underdog where you're trying to stack certain teams, like maybe you want 1 team from the NFC and 2 from the AFC and you're putting it all on Tampa. Like, man, then I love getting, Cyril Grayson at the end of a draft, to put with Brady. He's finished as wide receiver 33 and wide receiver 10 in the last 2 weeks, and that's on 74% and 52% of the routes. Obviously, last week would have been higher if Antonio Brown had missed more time. We do have Rashad Perriman, who's going to be coming back as well. He played a little bit this last week, but he had been dealing with COVID, also some other injuries, so he's kind of a wild card. Like, he's a guy that could get more involved. Surprisingly, Scotty Miller's been just nothing. Like, he was active this last game and couldn't even get out there with all the injuries.
I wonder if he's still just because he came off that IR, I believe, from a hamstring. I feel like he maybe just hasn't been right since then. Why they bring him back at all then? I'm not sure, but that has to be playing into something because he was getting legit snaps during that whole playoff run last year and really making the most out of them.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, look, what you're saying, I think, has merit. Like, we don't know for sure what's going to happen here, right? With these guys behind Evans and behind Gronk, it could just be a mishmash of all of them. It could be 1 or 2 of them taking over. My money, like, if I have to put a chip down today, if we have to place a bet today, I'm putting Tyler Johnson's going to continue to be the slot route. He's going to work underneath. You've already hit it. Doesn't mean he's Chris Godwin, but he does have Tom Brady as his quarterback, right? Yeah. So Tyler Johnson could make some noise, but Grayson would be the next guy that I would really put a chip on, just because we've seen him stretch the field. And honestly, like, if Evans is going to be battling this hamstring injury, like, they need somebody that can do that gives them that vertical element. Scotty Miller, he's a little bit of a wild card, but at this point, after being back for 3 games, 3 or 4 games, whatever it's been now, I don't know. I'm just kind of moving on from Scotty Miller.
Fair enough. And if it's more targets from Mike Evans, not the end of the world, despite not really getting force-fed targets in the same manner as we saw with Jameis. 27 touchdowns in his last 35 games, including playoffs, and he's about to become the first receiver ever with at least 1,000 yards in each of his first 8 seasons. The only guy to do it in his first 7 seasons. Oh, yeah, it's also Mike Evans. He's just breaking his own records.
And you really think there's any chance AB stays around, man? I just don't see how. Like, that's crazy.
No,
I know, like, talent, like, he's got the talent, like, he's shown it's still there, but like, just walking out on your team, I just don't, unless it, is a mental health thing, which obviously there's something going on there, and I feel for Brown, but I just don't see how, like, I don't see how Bruce Arians allows it.
I get it, man. I know he has had a few impossible to explain off the field issues.
Three with 3 different coaches now. What he did in Oakland, what he did in New England, and then now again here. Like, basically quit on all of them.
I more so mean like the one video where like he had his freaking like, kid and the kid was getting taken from him.
Yeah.
Like, okay. Like, because I brought some.
I'm just talking between the lines. What he's done now to the Raiders, what he's done to the Patriots. It just, at some point, you kind of got to be like, look, I feel for the guy, but I just don't see how Arians brings him back.
I'm with you there, but I just do feel for the guy based on a lot of the stuff. Again, I can't explain everything, but this is why I wish we have multiple categories of off the field issues, because Antonio Brown, you can call him a lot of things about what he's done, but you see these lists of things, and it's like he's having issues with his feet freezing. He's throwing a fit over his helmet not being right. Like, these are issues that I understand football teams don't want to deal with, don't deal with them and stuff. But I just think there are maybe worse
I think there's a
people
dose
out there.
of mental health issue. Obviously, there's something going on there. Like, and I'm a believer in that. I've battled through stuff. I've battled depression in my life. Like, I get it. So I know something's going on there, but there's also a sense of like, it's like this concoction, like where Brown is also like a diva, so you mix all that together, and it seems like it's more of a distraction than anything at this point. And it's go time now for the Bucs. Like, they got to be like geared up and ready to rock.
it's just wild, man, because from, 2010 to like halfway through 2018, essentially.
You never heard about anything.
Not even like a whisper. So, man,
Mike Tomlin was the thing is, and I hear a lot of this stuff was actually going on, and Tomlin like just kept it all in house. So, like Mike Tomlin, man, the master.
Kings stay kings, and Tomlin now has another year without a losing record.
Yeah, it's crazy, man.
Great job by him. All right, last wide receiver situation to quickly go over. And, Dwain, you add this to our handy dandy show sheet, and I initially scoffed at it. Then I pulled up the game log, and damn it.
I scoffed at it too, but I kept looking at it.
Zay Jones mini breakout is upon us. Last 6 games, he has at least 5 receptions in 5 of them. Last 3 specifically, he's gone 6 catches, 67 yards, 6 catches, 50 yards, and 8 catches, 120 yards. Doesn't have a touchdown since week 1 because, the Raiders, but damn, he really has been coming on strong. I remember having one fantasy playoff matchup in like a 14-team league. Guy against me was starting Zay Jones. I laughed at it early in the week. And you go and look at the end of the day, and the dude's putting up double-digit fantasy points. Dwain, any real takeaways from this, or is it just a fun late-season story? Because this kind of seems like to me something where we're going to be seeing articles in February and March like, it's like how I treated like Lynn Bowden last year, and he got hurt, so it's a little bit different. But there's always a handful of these guys where they have a nice little 5 to 6 week end of the season, but it's usually on a bad team that didn't have too many other places to go with the ball. So credit to Zay Jones here, but we're not really buying this moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Zay, he's been around long enough that it makes it tough, right, to really think that this is anything more than just something you can use for this season. But it just opens your eyes. Next year, you start off, he's on the waiver, and if he's on the wire, and if for some reason, like he's all of a sudden doing this in week 1 next year, well, then you're like, okay, well, he ended the year like this, and now he's starting the year like this. Then you might give it, some more credence. But it's mostly just something for folks that, for whatever reason, if you've got a week 18 championship game, or if you're just thinking about for DFS. But again, we're probably going to get Darren Waller back this week, and I think that probably changes everything. It is a must-win game for the Raiders. It really depends on Waller's health. If Waller's going to come back and really just kind of make his way through the game, and serve as a decoy, then that could actually help Zay Jones. If it's going to be Waller back and he's truly full strength, then I would think Hunter Renfrow and really Darren Waller are the main 2 players that you're going to want to have exposure to in the Raiders passing game. So, but it's just something to keep an eye on with Jones. I'm going to treat him more like, a low end wide receiver 3 this week with Waller coming back, or a high end wide receiver 4. It's something you may just be using to get a little bit of salary relief. I mean, the good news is, the Raiders need to win. They have to win, and so they're going to want to put out their best game plan they can, and this guy has been part of it for the last few weeks. Target shares of 25%, 29%, and 31%. He's at a career high targets per route run this year of 17%, so there is that.
Hey, Zay Jones, 2022. Weirder things have happened already in this short year. Moving on to some running back stuff before we get to our critically acclaimed fantasy awards. Darrell Williams taking over for Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and Chase Edmonds taking over for James Conner. Both hit the 80% snap mark. 3 down running backs, as we expected. As we told you last week, expect that to continue, assuming Clyde and James Conner remain sidelined. Dwain, I guess the more, interesting situation to talk about, if that's probably not the right word, but a situation that maybe we didn't see going quite this way was Dwain Ogunbowale. Good job, Ian. 66% snaps. Raquel Armstead only 30%. Laviska Shenault did not play a single backfield snap. So Dari did manage to get that late garbage time touchdown. It was Trevor Lawrence's 2nd touchdown pass since week 9, I believe. So credit to him for getting that. It all counts the same. We brought this up throughout the year. Style points don't matter in fantasy. Dwain, I guess Dari is going to be like a borderline RB2 because of this usage.
Yeah, I mean, he's almost an every down back. I mean, really, his utilization looks just like Rex Burkhead over the last 3 weeks. It's very similar to that. It's going to be around 65% of the snaps, going to be around 50% of the rushing attempts, but he's going to be in there for over half of the routes, getting the long down distance, the 2-minute offense. So he has more value in a PPR and a half point PPR. You really don't want to touch this guy in a standard league if you can avoid it. But I do like him in the half PPR, and I say I like him. I like him as a borderline RB2.
Love this this guy. He's my RB like 25 on the week. All right. One guy that I think we like a little bit more than that is Rashad Penny, who has really emerged as a Seahawks workhorse over the final month or so of the season. Last 4 games, he finishes the PPR RB3, done it as the RB42. I believe he got banged up in that one. Last 2 weeks, RB9 and the RB1 overall finish with the fantasy championships on the line. Dwain, he doesn't have a true every snap 3-down role. I know he's benefited for some, somewhat rare positive game script for the Seahawks. But at the end of the day, like we've seen it with Carson, we've seen it with obviously Marshawn Lynch, brief spurts of Alex Collins, Thomas freaking Rawls, CJ Precise over the years. If you can find a healthy enough running back in the Seahawks offense, they're a good bet to push for 20 plus touches during any given week. That's Rashad Penny right now.
Yeah, you just need it to be down to 2 backs, which it is. This week it was Penny, and it wasn't DJ Dallas, so you get the curveball. That's the problem, right? It was Travis Homer after it had been DJ Dallas for like the previous 3 weeks. But yeah, Penny is not seeing any of the passing down work, but he is getting all of the early down work. So essentially, right now you can count on Penny to handle somewhere, between 60 and 80%, right, of the Seahawks rushing attempts. He's had 52%, 71%, and 66%. And he's still involved just a little bit in the passing game, even though he's not handling the passing game work. He's still getting some of the targets on early downs. You still have all the problems you talked about with the Seahawks. They don't run enough plays. Their tempo's terrible. They can be destroyed by another team, and you could be completely game scripted out because we know he's not involved on passing downs. But the Seahawks are stubborn enough that they will stick with the run longer than a lot of other teams, even whenever they're trailing. So that is a plus. But yeah, I think 15 to 20 touches is pretty much a lock. I think the bigger thing with Penny, Ian, is just that, he's playing with efficiency. Like when you look at him over the last 4 games, his explosive run rate is 16%. So those are carries of 10 plus yards or more. That's one of the tops over that stretch. Yards after contact, 4.18 on the season now. So, Penny's way up there in some metrics that we care about. Missed tackles forced per attempt, 0.24. So he's really playing well. Former first-round pick. And most importantly for him, he's an unrestricted free agent. They did not pick up his 5th-year option last year. So he's probably going to make himself some money this offseason. It may still be a 1 or a 2-year deal, but he's going to get some money. I'm sure Seattle's going to try to keep him at this point because you get the neck issue with Carson. We don't know if Carson's going to be back. Ultimately, if Chris Carson's going to be back, you're better off if Penny leaves and goes to another team. And I hope Chris Carson is back, right? We don't want anyone to not have their health. But if for some reason we hear that Carson's going to hang them up or is not going to be available for the 2022 season and Penny is really the only guy there, I become much more interested. But definitely a guy that I'm looking forward to tracking in the offseason because we've seen some talent. We've seen some flashes from him in the past. Really the key is, can he stay healthy for a season? And so it'll be interesting to see, does any team look at him as that type of back, or does he really just get thrown into another committee?
Haven't you heard, Dwain? Chris Carson's only day to day, per Pete Carroll, right?
Yeah. He's minute to minute, according to Chris, according to Pete Carroll.
Unfreaking real. All right. Especially tilting running back situation. Dwain, we talked about this on the injury podcast all week long with DeAndre Swift. I was being cautious. On our preview pod, we were cautious. There's going to be 2 other backs involved. First game back from injury, wasn't exactly killing it other than garbage time usage before he got hurt. And then Dan Campbell had to come out and say that, no, they're going to cut him loose. He's back, practicing in full, no injury designation. Let's go. DeAndre Swift season, 4 carries, 2 receptions and 60 minutes of action. Come on, man. Dan Campbell, out of all the coaches that I didn't think would be giving us some BS.
But let's think about this. This is why folks have to be careful because people interpret what a coach says to be what they want, right? So listen, Dan Campbell was honest. He said, we're going to play, DeAndre Swift played 57% of the snaps. And guess what? He almost played in the same exact role that we saw earlier in the season. Did he get out there and handle as much of the passing down work whenever they were trailing? No, but the Lions also decided they wanted to continue running the ball more than what we had seen them do early in the season when they got down and they were trailing. That part of that might have been to do with Boyle being under center, not Goff. I'm not sure. So there was a little bit of a change there. The game script worked out right, but at the end of the day, his role wasn't that different. But now there are 3 backs involved. It's just like what we talked about. It was Jamal Williams handling the early down work, which, folks, Jamal Williams has been handling the early down work in neutral or positive game scripts all season. It just so happens that the Lions never get to play in those game scripts. So you never get to see Jamal Williams do anything. So and this is where utilization comes in, right? Because it tells you basically the writing's on the wall with these situations. And so it wasn't that huge of a change for Swift. The biggest change was that you have 3 backs involved. I don't know that we'll see that again at the beginning of next season. My guess is they're just still trying to take it a little bit easy, with Swift. So if you wanted to, get onto Campbell, for anything, maybe it's that, they didn't fully feel like they could unleash him for even 30 to 40% of the rushing attempts, which he had been getting earlier in the season. And then there were weeks where he was getting 50, 60%. But again, because they were trailing the whole game by a touchdown or more. As soon as Detroit gets the ball, they're often down by 7, immediately. Yeah, we'd like to defer so we can just immediately be down 7 when we get the ball for the first time. So it'll be something we'll have to track. If they do decide to use 3 backs next year, it's going to be a problem. I don't think Swift's going to have as much value next year, just because I think if the Lions can make any kind of improvement, right, they're not going to trail as much, which means you're going to see more Jamal Williams. They can get out of Jamal Williams' contract. I looked at it earlier today. It's a 2-year deal. They could get out of it if they want. I don't think they will. I think they'll keep him. And so I think it's just something that we'll have to sort through during the offseason as we get more news.
With Swift, mentioned, look, to your point, how much of his kind of production was coming at the end of games last year and how positive game script could change that. Yeah, so I sent this tweet on October 26th. So, about 6-7 games into the year. He had 29 PPR points in the first quarter, 19 in the second, 31 in the third, 57 in the fourth. And you look at this last game, they had one drive at the start of the fourth quarter with Craig Reynolds and Jamal Williams kind of switching off. And after that, they had 2 more drives and Tim Boyle was picked on 2 of his 3 passes. So it could have been a situation where, in a different simulation that we're living in, Swift gets his usual, 5-6 dump downs in garbage time. Just wasn't meant to be, unfortunately, in week 17. Running back that did come back from injury and have not his same role, but at least enough touches for us fantasy managers out there to be happy, was Elijah Mitchell. Only 58% snaps, but again, was able to clear that 20 carry mark and found the end zone as a receiver, even with Trey Lance under center. Dwain Mitchell, I think, is going to be one of the bigger kind of offseason talking points. We're going to need to consider, hey, could Trey Sermon in his second year be more involved? What about Jeff Wilson now having a healthy offseason? Hell, maybe, just maybe, they bring back Raheem Mostert. What are your thoughts on Mitchell coming back from injury and then kind of looking forward throughout the year? Because the dude has done nothing wrong. I looked at the overall numbers today, and it's pretty freaking ridiculous. 205 carries, touches, 205 touches without a drop or fumble. Shout out to Devontae Freeman. He's at 160. Nobody else is over even 60 of these. So Mitchell has done everything right. Kind of thoughts on, I guess, him here moving forward now that he's healthy and then also into 2022.
Yeah, in these playoff, best ball contests, I really love Mitchell. I like the backs where, their offense, depends on the running game. And the other part is a lot of these other backs are in committees that we're dealing with in the playoffs. But he's had an RB3, RB14, and an RB8 finish in his last 3 starts. So, he's a low-end RB1 and the second most run-centric offense in the NFL that runs a great scheme that he's a good fit in. I know a lot of folks, have doubts about Mitchell, about his talent, but look, all we care about is what Kyle Shanahan thinks, and he loves Mitchell right now. Now, I say right now because that bridges us into the offseason part of the conversation. It's something we're just going to have to monitor, and we're going to have to find some sort of inside source, because really what we know right now is Kyle Shanahan doesn't let the beat reporters in San Francisco know anything.
No, not a single word.
Yeah. So, and I can't even necessarily put it on them. He's just not letting them, know anything. But going back to this year, how could we be that off on Trey Sermon? How was there not a whisper that really Elijah Mitchell? No one knew. This was a surprise to everyone. Elijah Mitchell, he's just the guy. There was no bones about it. Starter right out of the gate. Obviously, the injuries kicked in, and that was a problem. But for Mitchell, with the offseason, we'll have to see. The 49ers like to add running backs. Will they add another one this offseason? What round will they draft them in? All that stuff's going to be in play. If they don't add another back, and if you subtract Mostert, and it's just him and Sermon, I'm going to assume it's Elijah Mitchell. Like, because it hasn't been close this year. I know Sermon's been out and he's on IR now, but it just hasn't been close. So I would lean in pretty heavily into Mitchell. But you just have to know the risk that comes with a 49er back. There is the upside because of the top of the offense that they play in and the explosive plays. But the downside is we know that we have a coach that is willing to, go with the committee. He's also willing just to switch to the hot hand at any time. So it's just something where you've got to weigh the risk and the reward. And Mitchell, he's going to be an interesting one because if the scenario that I just gave you plays out, like I haven't looked at ADP yet for any kind of drafts that are already going on. But look, we were drafting Trey Sermon in the 6th round this year without really seeing it. People have seen what Elijah Mitchell can do. So he's going to be a 3rd or a 4th round pick if the scenario I just gave you plays. Heck, he could push higher than that if the scenario I gave you just plays out.
Couple more backfields to talk about before we get on to the awards. In Washington, no Antonio Gibson led the way for Jarrett Patterson to be, basically the bell cow. Obviously, J.D. McKissic still on IR as well. Patterson, 62% snaps. Wendell Smallwood came in at 25%. Jonathan Williams, 13%. Dwain, it was Patterson leading the way both in rush attempts with 12 and then as well as in targets with 5. How close was this to the role we've seen Gibson having in past weeks without McKissic? Or is it maybe just more of a situation of, he got the targets, but it was actually Wendell Smallwood in pass first situations?
Yeah, it was more of the old Antonio Gibson with McKissic role.
Okay.
It was really more of just the early down stuff.
The one that pissed us off every single week.
Yeah, he got 63% of the rushing attempts, and he did have a targets per route run of 22%, 16% of the targets. But a lot of that was due to Washington staying in a positive game script for a lot of the game. They weren't getting themselves in long down and distance situations all the time, like we've seen them do in previous weeks. And so whenever you've got a situation like that, then a 3rd down all of a sudden turns into a down where a back like this can stay on the field some. And so if you look at it from a long down and distance situation, it was 80% of that went to Wendell Smallwood, but they did keep Patterson out there for some of the 2-minute offense, 61%, 39% for Smallwood. So, not quite as bad as the role that Gibson had to begin the season, a little better than that.
Low end RB2 here moving forward. Not quite Gibson.
I would say more high end RB3, just because with no bye weeks left, how it gets pretty packed in the top 24. I know there's only 24 every time, but what I mean is it gets hard to make the cut for the 24.
For sure. All right, how about another guy, same game, Boston Scott, just a 52% snap rate, but really Kenneth Gainwell wasn't out there at all, just one touch on the day. Jordan Howard did see 11 carries, but Boston Scott was able to both lead the way on the ground and take 4 of the 5 backfields targets. Miles Sanders, dealing with a hand. I'm not an injury expert, but I would think having non-broken hands would, help in catching and holding on to the football, taking a, big leap of faith right there. But Dwain, in this Eagles offense, we got a potential shootout coming up against the Cowboys at the end of the year. We know Boston Scott is the giant slayer, so we got to take a little bit off the projection, but man, he is still looking like the lead back in the league's most run-heavy offense, and he can catch the ball too. He's someone that I think we probably do need to squeeze in that top 24.
For sure. I think he's a mid-range RB2. You could call him a low-end RB2. That would be fine, too. But, he essentially took over Miles Sanders' role. Like, everything that Miles Sanders had been getting in the games he had been healthy, that all essentially went to Boston Scott. But Jordan Howard, to your point, still very involved. 34% of the snaps, 34% of the rushing attempts, out there for 31% of the routes. Actually handled some of the long down and distance. What's interesting is, Boston Scott's a good, receiving back, but they're not using him that way. So he didn't have really he didn't get, the passing down work. More of that went over to Gainwell, who still, to your point, didn't play a lot, but 13% of the snaps. And so it's kind of a mix right now across all of these guys for the passing down work. Not one guy getting all of it, but you'd kind of think they would just unleash Scott in that role. But I think it's really a situation where they're running the ball so much and giving these guys so many touches. They just want to keep it distributed across all of them. But to your point, it is an extremely run-heavy offense, especially over the last 10 weeks. So with Scott, you're also, even though he may get 40 to 50% of the rushing attempts, that doesn't sound good. That's like 70% to 80% for Devin Singletary, to kind of give you an example.
All right, everyone, that has been our quick briefer on everything that happened from week 17. Dwain, are you doing the utilization report this week, or are you actually going to spend time with your family? Wow.
It is out. I'm going to do a slim down version next week just for the playoff teams, for folks that are doing, some of the best ball contests that are out there. There's a lot of good ones, whether it's FFPC. Underdog's got one that I really like. because you can stack different teams and do it differently. Like the one over at FFPC, you just go in and you have to select one player from each roster across everyone that makes the playoffs. So you can't do that one until the playoffs are actually locked in. And there's some other ones like DraftKings has got one. So I'm going to do it for that because a lot of folks have given a lot of feedback that they found it helpful for those sort of things. So it'll be just as important as ever to figure out like who the hell we think is going to get utilized when.
Make sure you all check that out for full info across the week. And I also invite you to go check out Nathan Yonke's always great recaps from the week. This dude doesn't take a single day off. These recaps are out freaking after the week 17 games. Christmas doesn't matter. And he has immediate takeaways, snap rates, all that and more for free over on PFF.com. Now, Dwain, we're going to have a little fun here. Official PFF Fantasy Awards. I was, I put a column out. I am not grinding all 32 utilization reports like you. This week, decided to take the easy way out and just make up some awards, get the people riled up, and kind of review the season. So I just want to point out that at least from my making these awards, I did try to have, clear-cut quantitative methods for doing it. So I wasn't just pulling names out of the hat. I had many people questioning, I'm not going to tell you which award, but Cordarrelle Patterson won an award, and I saw some people on Twitter going, all right, like, I like you, Ian, but come on here, a little bit of home cooking going on. You can find the article on PFF.com, and I'll explain to you what I was thinking with this, but I think that's important because most valuable player, it can be 10 different guys if 10 different, people have different opinions on what constitutes the most valuable. So with all that in mind, Dwain, let's get into it. Our MVP of the 2021 fantasy football season, I believe, has to be Cooper Kupp. Why? Because he averaged 4.1 additional fantasy points per game over the wide receiver 2, who was Davante Adams. You look at Josh Allen, he was 1.6 fantasy points ahead of Tom Brady. Derrick Henry, 0.6 ahead of Jonathan Taylor. I understand, availability is the best ability, so we're keeping some of that in mind too. And then also Mark Andrews, just 0.7 additional fantasy points above Travis Kelce. So to me, it comes down between Cooper Kupp and Jonathan Taylor. But my God, man, yes, we're going to have to look at stats a little bit differently here with the 17 games. But this is something that's happened from when the NFL went from 14 to 16 games and now 16 to 17. We saw it in baseball over the years. Like, a record is a record at some point. And with that in mind, 1995, Jerry Rice has the all-time record among wide receivers with 414 PPR points. Right now, Cooper Kupp is at 412.9. So if you're a student of the game, historical scholar, and you're saying, I don't care, Cooper Kupp, he got that extra game, Rice is still the GOAT, fine. That means Cooper Kupp just had the second most productive season for a wide receiver that we've seen basically in NFL history. So Cooper Kupp, MVP, runner-up, Jonathan Taylor, and Dwain, I think people will be hard-pressed to find someone else that deserves to be in this conversation.
Yeah, no, I think Cooper Kupp is the one. And look, Jonathan Taylor is the runner-up for me that I added. But look, you had to take Jonathan Taylor at the end of the first round. Maybe you got him at the early second round. You got Cooper Kupp in the fourth or the fifth round. So there's also that. I mean, look, they're both great players. Like, if you had both of them, oh my gosh, like you went full beast mode on your league. But I mean, looking at Cooper Kupp, he got over 30 points. So here are his games. In week 2, 37 points. Week 3, 31 points. Week 6, 34. Week 7, 38. Week 13, there's a 27-pointer. Week 14, a 31-pointer. Week 15, 35. And look, like, his lowest game was 11.4 points. That was week 4. Then he had a 16-pointer in week 5, 17-pointer in week 2. Like, dude, it's just insane. Really, his low games were in the 20s. Like, so there's just a great floor, great ceiling. It's hard to find players like that. He was the guy this week. He was the guy this year. I mean, look, Davante Adams has scored 333 points. Cooper Kupp is almost beating him by 100 points. Woo. The king, Davante Adams, 100 points behind Cooper Kupp. So I do think Jonathan Taylor is the runner-up. He's close, to where we are with Cooper Kupp, 364 points on the season. And honestly, like, Taylor was a huge advantage, even though you had to take him at the end of the first or early in the second round, because if you look at how many backs went down and the guys stayed healthy. So, I mean, that's just really helped catapult him past everyone. Once Derrick Henry went down, it was really down to Jonathan Taylor and Austin Eckler, in the conversation for the top 2 backs on the season. Taylor, similar to what we talked about with Kupp, he's got 32-pointer, 29 points, 34 points, a 53-point week in week 11, a 26-pointer in week 13. So, I mean, yeah, he's had some weeks where he started off a little rough. Like, and we talked about early on, they didn't really give him the things that worried you and I, which we'll talk about in a minute, were really a problem for him for about the first 3 weeks of the season. Week 2, he only put up 6 points. Week 3, he put up 8 points. But slowly but surely, the talent just began to take over. And when you got, Quentin Nelson over telling the coach, we got a hungry running back. We got to feed this dude. You just got to go with it.
Yeah, and I would say they did a good job feeding him. Carries inside the 20-yard line this year. Jonathan Taylor's number 1 at 83. And second place is Dalvin Cook with 45. I don't think anyone is debating Jonathan Taylor being, the world-beating talent that deserves those touches. But even then, Dwain, we just see the kind of role that volume can play into these huge fantasy seasons. Now, best fantasy championship game performance. You're either loving this guy right now or you're hating his name. It's Ja'Marr Chase, and I don't think there's much debate about that. Caught 11 of 14 targets for 266 yards, not 1, not 2, but 3 touchdowns against the Kansas City Chiefs. First one, man, to see him put his foot in the ground and just outrun the whole secondary, it showed you the sort of special yak ability he has. And then you saw, the token, oh, hey, I'm going to go up and win these one-on-one battles on a couple other contested touchdowns later in the game. So, his first half of the year was just incredible, and we continue to stick with him, ranking him highly through thick and thin in the second half. And, ultimately he comes down, finishes the year, at least the fantasy season, as the overall wide receiver 5 and trailing only Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, Deebo Samuel, and Justin Jefferson. So certainly saved his best for last, but man, just overall, what a great rookie campaign for Ja'Marr Chase, already putting himself in the conversation with the league's best receivers, regardless of the year they were playing. So shout out to Ja'Marr Chase on winning all sorts of people their fantasy weekend. But Dwain, a guy we already talked about and deserves recognition as well, Rashad Penny, for that overall RB1 performance. God forbid you played both these guys in the same week. I couldn't even imagine the words I'd be yelling at.
Well, if you go look at best ball leagues where, over on Underdog, and you look at the DraftKings, millionaire maker for, best ball, they had these players. And so can you imagine all of a sudden seeing the owner that had Rashad Penny just stashed, sitting down there? And that's the beauty of best ball, right? It could be that could be one of your last picks as a guy like Rashad Penny. And then all of a sudden here he is, complete hero. And guess what? You don't even have to choose the week you got to start him. You just get to roll with it when it happens. So yeah, I think Penny is the runner up, just because of the RB1 performance in such a huge week. But man, with Ja'Marr Chase, looking at the 24% of targets as a rookie, Ian, it's very rare. We just don't see that. We're talking since 2011, he's in company with Mike Evans, Odell Beckham Jr., the very best of the best in their rookie season. So sky is absolutely the limit for Ja'Marr Chase. He's going to be an elite talent for a long time. 96% of the routes on the season, 24% of the targets, 39% of his team's air yards, 42% of the end zone targets, 28% of the third and fourth down targets. Number 5 in PPR scoring right now. And man, I'm already starting to work on my ranks. I'm going to put them out next week for 2022. My first draft. It's just I keep thinking, I don't have Ja'Marr Chase high enough. I don't think I have him high enough. I've already got him in my top 5. And I feel do I just go ahead and just rank him number 2? Man, it's just the upside with this guy is just, it's through the roof.
And guess what? T. Higgins is also awesome. We don't need to keep having this which one type of thing. After the Higgins blow up,
Higgins is inside my top 12 as well.
as he should be. I mean, but it's just funny to me. We're after week 16, we're seeing was Higgins the alpha all along tweets, and then after last week, it's Chase is the best rookie receiver by far. He's arguably the best wide receiver in the NFL right now. It's we can put up these guys without putting down the other one. Just keep that in mind when praising these incredible NFL athletes. Most improved fantasy player. Now, this is the way I calculate this was looking at the biggest differences in PPR points per game from 2020, looking ahead to 2021. So I required 8 games in each year, so that did knock out a few worthwhile contenders. But with that said, Dwain, it's Cordarrelle Patterson. 4.2 PPR points per game in 2020. 15.4 in 2021. That 11.2 improvement was the second largest among all the players I tracked. The only guy that had more was Cooper Kupp.
I don't know how anyone can argue with this.
I know,
how
right?
does anyone even argue? Here's the other way I look at it. This is a player you didn't even draft in a 20-round fantasy
Exactly.
draft.
He also wins waiver wire pickup of the year, which I didn't officially do, but he would win that.
He could win all sorts of awards. Like, you just can't argue with it. And look, it's honestly, I think it's the craziest thing I've ever seen in fantasy football. Maybe going back to the year in Cleveland. What was the fullback?
Peyton Hillis.
Yes, Peyton Hillis. It may be the runner-up to this, but I still give it to Patterson because a player that's been in the league for 10 years, I mean, and we just didn't, as much as we may like Cordarrelle Patterson, as much as we may know Cordarrelle Patterson's, a great, athlete, just he hasn't been able to be unlocked by all of these different coaches. And now to think that Arthur Smith could do it, it's mind-blowing to me.
11 touchdowns this year on offense. That's how many he scored combined from 2014 to 2020. Man, he had 1,154 total yards this year. The previous 3 years, 1,025. That's the thing. So technically, yes, Kupp had the larger improvement, but Kupp has always, throughout his career, been at worst like a wide receiver too. So Patterson went from being someone that you basically never thought of in fantasy to being either the overall PPR RB7 or the wide receiver 15, depending on what floats your boat. What a year from our guy, CPAT. And Dwain, I went ahead and purchased, he has his own apparel thing going out, and he said first 10 people to order get a signed Patterson note, or they get an autograph. That's what they freaking call it. But anyway, I got this cool highlighter 84 CP hoodie. Fingers crossed I was one of the first 10 and I get that autograph. Just some other quick honorable mentions. Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, and Tyler Conklin had the largest differences at their respective positions. Joe Burrow also had a nice boost. Tom Brady had a nice boost. You can still put up fantasy points without having rushing ability. Kids, Leonard Fournette, shout out to him, plus 8.1 improvement. Darrell Williams, A.J. Dillon, Damon Harris, each averaged at least 5 additional PPR points per game. So did Jonathan Taylor. That dude's a beast. And only 4 wide receivers to clear at least 6 points. Kupp, Michael Pittman, Hunter Renfrow, and Van Jefferson. So great stuff from all of them. One guy, Dwain, that yes, he does need to be talked about. The only reason I missed him was because he played 7 games last year and my threshold was at 8, is Deebo Samuel. Man, I don't know how long, how much time did we spend this year talking about how Deebo Samuel was due to regress for one reason or another? It didn't matter. Baller's ball, and that's Deebo Samuel.
Yeah, man. The way I look at this award is pretty simple. Who are the players you could have got the latest in a draft that you were just supercharged about putting in your lineup for the championship game, and they came through still from the beginning of the season to the end? Samuel had a little 3-week stretch, but yeah, this is a player that most wrote off because they said, hey, Ayuk is just a better route runner. He can run the complete tree. He can do all these different things. And then people just forgot, Deebo Samuel, the run after the catch ability in this scheme, and just how much his coaching staff loves him, using him in the backfield, handling 20% of the rushing attempts over the last 6 or 7 weeks. So he's really a dual threat player. Kind of like Cordarrelle Patterson. They're kind of similar in that way. And so, from that standpoint, it's not surprising to hear both names, coming at us. But Samuel, man, just a guy that you're loving to play. He's in the top 3 now for the season, and you could have got him in the 8th, 9th round. So that's huge.
All right, next award, Best Fantasy Comeback. This is based on first half versus second half production. Last year, I named it David Montgomery because he had an awesome second half of the year. And PFF Twitter account just hung me out to dry, and all they said was Ian's comeback player of the year is David Montgomery. So I had to have Alex Smith stands at my neck for 24 hours. So all due respect to Dak Prescott, Joe Burrow, your real life comeback players of the year. In fantasy, I think it goes to Amon-Ra St. Brown. Only 3 players were able to post a double-digit increase in their PPR points per game from weeks 1 through 8 compared to weeks 9 through 17. James Conner, Elijah Moore, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I know Conner and Elijah helped maybe get us to the playoffs, but obviously both were too injured to ultimately play, which leaves us to Amon-Ra. And honestly, even with Conner and Moore, if they had played, I think, the sun god, as we're calling him, I guess, would be, a more than viable candidate. What he did over these last 5 weeks, man, truly special. PPR wide receiver 6. Wide receiver 26, wide receiver 6, wide receiver 6, and a championship Sunday wide receiver 2 finish. So during this span, 43 catches, only Cooper Kupp had more at 46. And, Dwain, incredible finish from Amon-Ra. He's going to be one of the most, maybe polarizing is the right word for like just ranking next year, because it's hard to look at this late season split and view him as anything other than a target hog wide receiver 2. The question is, I think we're all pretty well aware this Lions receiving room is going to add multiple pieces. How likely is it that he continues to get fed in this manner? But at a minimum, just looking back, what a freaking finish from the rookie.
Yeah, man. Like I'm stoked to see what happens in the offseason. We know that the Lions need weapons. So undoubtedly they're going to add other players. But here's the thing that I look at, just because, and we've talked about this, like just because you're the only option left doesn't mean you're good enough to demand this sort of target share. Like you've got to be good enough to beat first the one-on-one matchup across from you. Then as you get better and coaches start to scheme for you, you got to be able to beat doubles. You got to be able to beat help coverage. It's not like the NFL coaches are just looking at this now and they're like, just forget this guy. Like, and he's really been winning some plays down the field. I know he gets to work from the slot, but he's got to work more outside over the last several weeks. So he's really been playing the flanker position and the slot position. This last week, they trailed pretty much the whole game. So they did use more 11 personnel. So he got to kick back inside to the slot, but he's been winning really, in both areas. And I mean, so it's just a situation where when I look at it, it's like his comps, whenever I go in and use some of our key metrics that we have available to us, like the high end of it, it's kind of like Doug Baldwin, or even a little bit higher, like Cooper Kupp would be like the next one up. And then it goes all the way down to like Jamison Crowder. But like Jamison Crowder, like is nothing terrible. Like, yeah, he hasn't done well with the Jets, here this last year. He's been hurt and things like that. But when you've had a healthy Jamison Crowder with an okay quarterback, like he's been a player that you can use in fantasy. So the way I look at Amon-Ra St. Brown right now, at a minimum, he's a wide receiver 3 next year because I think he can do what Crowder does. But I think he also has upside to really be more than what, than someone like Crowder because of what he's shown, despite being like the complete focal point of the offense, knowing that defenses are trying to take him away late in the season.
And he's going to be a guy that I think, the adage that I probably brought up on every single episode last offseason, like trying to draft these players closer to their floors than their ceiling. That is Amon-Ra St. Brown, because even if they add some extra receivers and the passing game improves, you would think he can maintain that wide receiver 3 goodness. Just some other notable guys. Dwain had runner-up here. Jalen Waddle, fantastic end of the season. I mean, we saw when Tua was under center, had a nice little, more or less, wide receiver 2 floor built in with wide receiver 1 upside. I get it. Week 17 didn't exactly, crush it, but I'm sure he got you to week 17 with that week 16 performance against the Saints. Just some other nice notes.
And just another player that you were getting in the 9th or 10th round.
Exactly.
Of your drafts, But to your point, it's more about like this particular reward. It's more about what they did in the first half versus the second half. Yep. If you just look at the second half, I mean, just like some of these games, a 21-pointer, a 29-pointer, 18, 25, 16. So, I mean, Jalen Waddle had a huge second half of the season.
Best quarterback, second half improvements. Justin Fields averaged an additional 6.4 fantasy points per game in the second half of the year. I think we're going to be, talking a lot about Fields, Lance as the late round quarterbacks of 2022. I hope they are the late round quarterbacks.
No,
it's funny.
They'll be pushed up beyond that. Lance has already done enough that like he'll cost you a 9th.
Well, this is what happened last year.
That's late round to a lot of people.
We'll see, man. We'll see.
A late round is a 12th or 13th rounder.
Jalen Hurts last year started off as a non-late rounder. I don't think maybe there were enough trade rumors or what, but he ended up by August being a legit late round quarterback after spending a lot of, I think, the sharper summer months as a top 8 or so quarterback. So we'll see. Either way, good improvement from Justin Fields and Zach Wilson, who I saw, even someone like Benjamin Solak, who wrote pretty scathing review on The Ringer about Wilson's performance, but he was out there last week on Twitter just pointing out some of the awesome throws that Wilson has made over the past few weeks. So that improvement is what you would hope for from a quarterback getting healthy. And then, let's face it, being forced to play without Corey Davis or Elijah Moore down the stretch. Hopefully Zach Wilson can, really take a leap forward in 2022 and become a potentially incredibly entertaining quarterback. We know he at least has a skill set. Also, Aaron Rodgers, big improvement as well. Joining James Conner as running backs with at least a 7.5-point improvement. A.J. Dillon, Sony Michel, and our guy Justin Jackson. Obviously, that was a little bit more inflated because of that Week 15 performance. But hey, that won a lot of people that fantasy matchup. So wide receiver joining St. Brown and Elijah Moore, Brandon Ayuk, and Russell Gage. And also shout out to Jimmy Garoppolo for enabling George Kittle to one heck of a second half performance. Takes us to our Rookie of the Year, Dwain. I don't think it's that hard. It's Ja'Marr Chase. You could make an argument for Najee Harris just based on the fact that Najee, let's see what he finished as. I believe the RB3 overall. Okay, RB4 overall on a per game basis. He's RB6. But my thing, and I guess the tiebreaker, is Najee, if you just want to look at expected points, which we've talked about a lot on here, and taking the difference between realized fantasy points and expected fantasy points, Najee was the most inefficient running back in all of football in terms of what we expected him to do. On the other side of things, the only wide receiver that outperformed Ja'Marr Chase in performance above expectation was Deebo Samuel. So Ja'Marr Chase was balling and exceeding expectations. Najee Harris balling, but not even meeting the expectations. So shout out Ja'Marr Chase, take some best fantasy championship performance and rookie of the year. And again, Dwain, I don't think many people would argue that point, but the bigger takeaway, I think, look at all these stud rookie receivers, man. I mean, we've always looked at running back in the past as kind of being the more NFL ready position coming out. They have such a short lifespan in the NFL anyway. Teams have always been feeding them. But more and more, man, these rookie receivers, they're coming in and dominating from day one.
Yeah, and you heard me talk about it a minute ago with Ja'Marr Chase, and the target share of 24%. But looking at these other guys, like Waddle at 23% of the targets, Devonta Smith even. I know it's a run-heavy offense, so we don't get to talk about him as much, but 23% of the targets. Coming out and doing that, at age 22 or younger, which is Smith is an older rookie. He's 23, still in his first year. It's really rare, man. You just don't see it. And we've got multiple guys doing it. And then we had some other guys that might have been able to do it. Could they have just stayed healthy, with Elijah Moore? Because when you look at his targets per route run, 24%. Kadarius Toney even. Now, his is a really small sample size. You have to be careful, but 27% targets per route run for Toney, who had 5 different elements, keep him out this year. Yeah. One of the guys that wasn't as impressed with was really Rondale Moore, but a lot of that was the function of the way Kingsbury just forced him into this one role. I don't think we've fully seen what Rondale Moore can do. But when back to St. Brown, you got Devonta Smith, you got Jalen Waddle, and then Kyle Pitts, which is really the next guy, I was gonna talk about here in a minute, so I'll save that and I'll wait on him. But it's just, we haven't had a rookie class with this many receivers over the 20% target share mark. And I'm only looking at this back to 2011, but this is the best class we've seen.
Also, shout out to Mac Jones, the best rookie signal caller in real life and fantasy, but he finished as just the overall QB 19 in fantasy land. I think it just, again, helps demonstrate just how few rookie quarterbacks have also been elite full season fantasy performers. Since 2010, the only rookie QBs to finish in the top 12, Cam Newton, Andrew Luck, RG3, Russell Wilson, Dak Prescott, Kyler Murray, and Justin Herbert. Everyone except Herbert were starting by week 1, and they had averaged at least 25 rushing yards per game in college. And I think, those two factors were a big reason why a lot of people were on Trevor Lawrence, Trey Lance, and Justin Fields as potentially joining that group. As we saw with Lance and Fields, had a hard time getting on the field. And as we saw with Trevor Lawrence, was exactly in the sort of offensive environment to take advantage of the sort of tools he brought to the table. Shout out to Elijah Mitchell, RB14 on a per game basis, only rookie running back as a top 24 performer. Javonte Williams, awfully close to RB25. And shout out Michael Carter, RB29. I did one of those charts where I like to put yards after contact per carry rank on the y-axis, missed tackles forced per carry on the x, and you kind of see the best of the best running backs emerge in the top right. And right there, alongside Nick Chubb, alongside Tony Pollard, some of these other guys, both Michael Carter and Javonte Williams, they're putting something in that North Carolina Gatorade cooler. You mentioned Waddle, St. Brown, Devontae Smith, Elijah Moore joining Ja'Marr Chase. And yes, let's move on to Kyle Pitts, because we're still seeing the, oh my gosh, this is one of the best rookie tight end seasons ever. And he just didn't really meet the preseason expectations, which were higher than almost any tight end we've ever seen. So I just want to compare him more as a wide receiver, because that's more so what he plays. 67% of his snaps were in the slot or out wide this year. But if we're going to continue to call him a tight end in fantasy land, then whatever. Either way, he was efficient on a yardage basis this year. Looking at rookie receivers, wide receivers, and tight ends combined over the past 5 years, here are the guys averaging the most yards per route run. A.J. Brown, Justin Jefferson. Third place, Ja'Marr Chase. Juju Smith-Schuster. Fifth place, Kadarius Toney. How about that? And this was a minimum 50 targets. And yeah, Kadarius actually did eclipse that. Right behind Toney, though, was Kyle Pitts at 2.13 yards per route run. So, Dwain, I've mocked him a little bit on this podcast, I would say. And his only touchdown this year has been against John Franklin Myers, a defensive end for the New York Jets. So let's say that was probably a bad idea for the Jets to cover him at that. But at a minimum, man, I'll be very interested to see where he falls, because if we have a chance to get Pitts as more of a low-end tight end one in 2022, my God, we're going to buy this dude everywhere, because if there's any player that we expect to experience, positive touchdown regression next year, it's Kyle Pitts.
Yeah, like he's the number one. Like we got 102 targets, 66 receptions, 1,018 yards, and you only have one receiving touchdown. So like that should be more like 5. And I get it. Like some of that comes down to him. Some of it comes down to the offense, but some of it's just variance, And so if he continues to get this kind of workload, and he will continue to be a tight end, probably in most formats. And I think as we see Hayden Hurst move along eventually in his career, I haven't even looked at his contract, I think you'll start to see more of Kyle Pitts getting the lineup inside. I wish they would. This guy's a complete nightmare for linebackers and safeties. Why do you got to keep lining him up outside? I think there's a chance you'll get to see him even more inside next year, just because of how well Russell Gage has played. You get Calvin Ridley back. You can play them on the outside. You can put Pitts in the slot. You can put him, in line as well. So I think there's just a lot of different things that you can do with him. But the main thing is just seeing a rookie getting this type of volume, getting over 1,000 yards, whether you call him a receiver or a tight end, doesn't even honestly matter. It's even better for a tight end. And the main thing is, what do we get to call him for fantasy? And so from that perspective, like looking at Pitts, it's going to be hard for me, man, to not have him in my top 3, just because some of these other guys are getting older. We know that the touchdown regression is going to swing back the other way for Pitts. And I think you can make an argument, right, that he has an elite upside to be the tight end 1 again. I know people may have been a year early on it, but he didn't pay off. You're right, on his draft capital. I had him ranked higher than any other fantasy analyst at PFF in the preseason ranks, and so I'm one of those guys that probably was a little bit too high on him, and I was very aggressive. I play in a lot of tight end premium leagues, for high stakes type stuff. So I was drafting Pitts quite often, and he didn't help me win championships. So your point is correct. Like taking him in the 3rd or the 4th round, there were picks I could have made. Cooper Kupp. There would have been a lot better picks to be making whenever I was taking Kyle Pitts. But I think all the things that made me love him last year, going into the season, or this season for the 2021 season, are all going to be there in 2022. And he did nothing to really make me think, oh my God, I was wrong. I'm more encouraged than ever about Pitts, as long as he gets to remain a tight end for fantasy.
Final award we have here, and Dwain, this was a McFarland special. He's not a backup coach award, Javonte Williams. We're not here to slander Melvin Gordon. I know he got negative rushing yards a few weeks ago, but Melvin Gordon was at worst an average back this year, and I think he was honestly probably an above average player. But my God, man, when we have Javonte Williams, and missed tackles forced aren't an all-encompassing running back stat. Neither is yards per carry. Neither is any one stat for a running back. But I do think zeroing in on one of the few situations of a running back being forced to make a defender miss a tackle, it's one of the few one-on-one spots that we have for running backs. And at the end of the day, Javonte Williams has 60 missed tackles forced on carries, as does Jonathan Taylor. They're number 1 and number 2. The difference is it took Jonathan Taylor 317 carries to get there. Javonte has just 191 on the year. Just from an eye test standpoint, Dwain, I think it's impossible to call Javonte Williams anything other than the rookie RB1. And, we're going to be praying to fantasy gods every single day throughout this offseason that he is truly unleashed in 2022.
And I think he will be. I don't think Melvin Gordon will be back in Denver. We'll see what happens. They could. But hopefully it is just Williams. But he should be getting more work. This guy leads the league, like you mentioned in missed tackles forced per attempt, 0.31. This is a minimum of 150 attempts. And then if you look at yards after contact, it's 3.39. That's 4th in the league for backs with at least 150 attempts. And then his explosive run rate, which is carries of 10 yards or more, he ranks 5th at 13%. So all of these different things, and that's the one I like to look at the most, the explosive run rate, because that's where you're truly helping your offense out. You're basically creating chunk plays on the ground. You're creating positive EPA. You're not. It's not a situation where it's a complete give up to not pass and you're running the ball instead. If you just want to go to a math equation about it. So looking at Javonte Williams, solid prospect. I don't see how next year, if Melvin Gordon's gone, and I haven't ranked my RBs yet for 2022. Like I said, that'll be coming out next week. But man, just right now, I'm going to assume that Melvin Gordon's gone. And there's no way he's not in my top 12. Like, I'm just wondering how high am I going to push Javonte Williams?
Yeah, because if they get a legitimate quarterback upgrade, which I don't know, I think they could probably add 30 quarterbacks and get a legitimate quarterback upgrade. But God forbid they land a Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers. Like, top 5 is now the question, Dwain. The only game that Javonte didn't have Melvin Gordon, he finished as the overall RB1. The guy can do it all. And what?
He's a 21 years old. He's a plus in the passing game, too. I mean, 20% targets per route run this season. Like, so when he's out there, they're willing to throw him the ball. I mean, obviously that's a problem. Teddy Bridgewater needs to use the other weapons and throw it downfield, but he is a viable target. Can you imagine Aaron Rodgers, Russ Wilson, someone like that landing in Denver with Javonte Williams as the feature back? Oh my God.
Yeah, and then Dynasty Lamb, man, if you just want to call the guy I think everyone probably has to have Jonathan Taylor as the overall RB1 at this point, but Javonte, pretty good case for RB2.
I agree.
He turns 22 years old on April 25th. Like, Najee's going to be 24 by then, man. It's incredible what Javonte has done.
If they get Aaron Rodgers, for example, and look, this is the beauty of the offseason. Now we get to talk about all these things.
Let's go.
If they get Aaron Rodgers and Melvin Gordon is gone, like, are you gonna? He might be in my top 3. Like, the dude is great. He's a great player. He would then be in a great situation, and what we would expect to probably be a top 3 offense with all the other weapons around him. Like, he would immediately be a candidate to score 20 touchdowns if he landed in an offense like that.
Going to take a lot of lonely fantasy analysts from 6 to midnight if we get that working out. Fantasy Awards, summing it up. MVP, Cooper Kupp. Shout out Jonathan Taylor, runner-up. Best Fantasy Championship Performance, Jamar Chase. Runner-up, Rashad Penny. Most Improved Fantasy Player, Cordarrelle Patterson. Runner-up, Deebo Samuel. Best Fantasy Comeback, first half versus second half, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Runner-up, Jalen Waddle. Rookie of the Year, Jamar Chase. Runner-up, probably Najee Harris. He's not a backup coach award, Javonte Williams, and most likely to score more touchdowns next season is Kyle Pitts. And Dwain, that Kyle Pitts note, I think, takes us right into kind of our quick overall 2021 lesson takeaway. And for me, it's to make sure that we're projecting for next season, not just reflecting on what just happened. I think a lot of people make the mistake where their initial kind of building process for next year's rankings is more or less taking what just happened in the previous year. And okay, that's probably better than taking, what happened in 2018 and building off on that. But like with Kyle Pitts, man, we got to be treating on what Kyle Pitts is going to be, not on what he was. And I know that's easy to say, but like when we see Jonathan Taylor and Cooper Kupp blowing up the way they did, they're going to be the consensus RB1, wide receiver 1 a year after nobody had them even close to that, particularly in Kupp's case. I know some of you Jonathan Taylor true truthers had him top 4, top 5, and credit to you for doing so. But just on a consensus industry-wide basis, I don't think that was the case. So for me, seeing that I made this mistake this year, I do think Jonathan Taylor was one of those issues, because in 2020, the stat I love to throw out there was that Marlon Mack, Nyheim Hines, and Jordan Wilkins had, as a group, more combined carries and targets than Jonathan Taylor, but we got to remember, this was going to be Taylor's second year. He did see a nice increase in the second half of the season, and, with the offensive questions with Wentz, going from Rivers to Wentz, I do think just the talent with Taylor and that offensive line, probably enough where I should have had him higher than I think it was RB11 that we came into the year with. And another bad one was Tyler Boyd, who I expected to be more of a borderline wide receiver 2. Now, some of the Bengals pass down usage, with them being so run heavy, really up until week 15 and week 16, obviously played a role in that. But just realizing that Boyd compared to Higgins, compared to Chase, I shouldn't have been as confident as I was that target share was going to be sticky and Boyd was going to, again, either lead the way or be, a 1A, 1B, 1C. So I didn't completely miss on this. And, again, Dwain, I always like to say people are awfully loud in your mentions, at 4 p.m. on Sunday. I like to think that, we're doing a pretty good job when people don't have as much to say before kickoff. But, one of the things I brought up was that Austin Eckler had the role that we hoped Alvin Kamara would still have. And then also, a point that both of us were on target Jalen Waddle and drafts of all shapes and sizes, because this dude was a borderline wide receiver 4 that we could easily see, based on his draft position, based on his skill set, leading this team in targets, even though it wasn't a good passing game. When you can draft the freaking wide receiver 48 as a guy that's going to see triple digit targets, that's a good idea. So just really emphasizing more and more that, when we're asking each other questions this offseason about why we have a guy ranked as high as we do, I want to make sure that a lot of our reasoning has to do with what's going to happen. Again, not just reflecting on what did happen.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important. Like, I mean, I've been doing my own projections for 15 years now. And like when I first started, that what you're talking about is like one of the mistakes, that I would make. Like now, like when I'm doing my projections, like I'm using a lot of different tools to help me with it. And obviously last year it's a data point, but really you're looking at how good do you think the team is? You're looking at the coach, the coaching staff, like schematically, like what do they like to do? How does that talent fit? And really talent like is the number one thing. And I think that's what we have to remember. The takeaway for me, and it ties back, Jonathan Taylor is actually a really good example. But whenever you have things that are close, Ian, I think what you have to do is you just lean into the talent. Right? You lean into the fact that Jonathan Taylor just kicks ass. I think the other thing you look at is because everybody has a range of outcomes, right? Based on how they get utilized. But some players like Jonathan Taylor, if things go right, what do you get? It's more than what you get if things go right for Najee Harris, right? If things go right for Javonte Williams, you get more than what you get if things go right for Najee Harris, because Javonte Williams has just shown us he's the superior player, right? And what he could do with that opportunity. And that's really what we should have done with Jonathan Taylor. That's where I do look back and think, dang it, like I should have drafted more Jonathan Taylor. I didn't get enough of him, right? It cost me this year. I made money in high stakes leagues this year, but I could have made a lot more if I had not been so stubborn on my Jonathan Taylor take. And there's a reason for it. Like I looked at it as they re-signed Nyheim Hines. They gave him good money, and Nyheim Hines happens to be really good at what he does, which is he's a down the field receiving back. He can run it. His ADOT, when I say down the field for a receiver, that means his ADOT is like above a 1. Like so, he's in the mold of an Eckler, of an Alvin Kamara. Like he's actually a better route runner than even those guys, right? He's kind of more like what we saw with Darren Sproles. And so my concern was like with such a specialist involved, man, like he could have been more involved. And I will say this, I still think you lean into the talent, but there could have been a different simulation of this season. The Colts have led the fourth most in the NFL. Like they've led by 4 or more points, the 4th most plays in the NFL. So it has enabled Jonathan Taylor to also be, and Jonathan Taylor's been part of what's created these scripts, right? So sometimes it's a chicken or the egg kind of thing. But they've been very fortunate. And I do think there's situations where in the future we could see less Jonathan Taylor, because if it's 3rd and 9, unless you're running a screenplay, let's face it, Nyheim Hines is still the better play to have on the field than Jonathan Taylor. So, and we saw it go the exact opposite. Most guys that were touting Jonathan Taylor were also touting Antonio Gibson. Well, it was almost the same exact situation. Look, I'm not going to say it's the same because Jonathan Taylor, we knew clearly was a better talent, right, than Antonio Gibson. It's not like we thought those two were close.
Gibson, his rookie year, had a lot better kind of missed tackle numbers, some explosive run numbers, and he was playing a little banged up. But, I mean, you brought this up earlier on. Their role, obviously Taylor's role has increased a little bit as this year has gone on, but really the first 6 weeks or so and what we saw last year, their role was close to the same.
Right. And so it worked in one case and in the other it didn't. But at the same time, like my kind of lesson is if you've got players that are close in a similar tier, just lean to the upside of the talent.
Yeah.
Right. And if you got and maybe not be so hardcore about drawing a line in your tier that makes Jonathan Taylor the top player in the next tier down. Right. Maybe Jonathan Taylor's talent alone should mean, you know what? He just belongs in this tier with these other guys that we know are going to get all the work, because guess what? These things are fluid. And some of it, Ian, we just don't know how it's going to work out. Look at the Ravens. I think the Ravens are a great example. No one wanted to touch a lot of the Ravens receivers this year because there's no way, Ian, all the Ravens has ever done, all they've ever done is be a run heavy offense. Well, some of these things are out of our control. Like when your offensive linemen get hurt, your running backs get hurt, and you look at the receivers that they've drafted, all of a sudden the Ravens are a pass, I don't want to call it a pass heavy team, but they're a pass balanced team whenever they were a complete run heavy team in the past. And so it's a situation where we've just also got to remember with talent, like there's just a lot of different things we can't necessarily predict, right? We can't predict the injuries. We can't predict like necessarily the way a lot of these game scripts are going to do. Yeah, we're looking at the lines for Vegas. We're looking at the teams that are favored to win the most games. We think they're going to be more positive scripts, but things don't always work. And there's so many variables involved a lot of times just being able to lean back on talent whenever you're in these close situations is just going to be the better thing, to do. As far as like good calls versus bad calls, individual players, I'll name a few like that I felt really good about. Jalen Hurts, Joe Mixon. I was the highest of the PFF staff on Justin Jefferson. Overall, I was just high on receivers, and I pushed the dead zone running backs down my board further than most. And so I feel really good about avoiding those, and my ranks reflected that. So if you use my ranks, I feel that I pushed you into a positive direction that probably had you trying to grab one running back in the first 2 rounds, pile on the receivers, come back and get running backs later, and then just working the waiver wire. We kind of got fortunate on the waiver wire this year because there was 1,000 running back injuries. You're not always going to get that many. But I tell you what, man, it's still a pain in the ass because, like, if you're like me and you're working 30 waiver wires, like having to churn through that many backs, sometimes it almost takes, you're like, man, I wish I would have just freaking had 2 running backs on my team so I didn't have to do all these waiver wires. Of course, assuming that your 2 backs didn't get hurt, because we had so many players get hurt this year that were from the first round. So overall, like, the things I feel the best about are fading the dead zone running backs, and so this is more of a macro view, not just a micro. And then just being more heavy on the wide receiver in the mid rounds. And again, now that does come down to your drafts. It just so happens the way that where these players were being drafted, I felt the most upside. And the safety, right, from an injury standpoint, which is where like the zero strategy does kind of come in, not to take it like to a huge extreme, but the value that you get, the robustness that you can create like in your lineup, at the receiver position. And in a lot of the leagues I play in, I have to draft, 2 flex players. So I was just looking to fill the flex with the receivers, and the way that everything was stacking out from the way ADP worked, which is a huge thing. It was just really more, it just looked better. Like the strategy this year looked to be better going after those receivers in the middle rounds and getting away from the backs that really had like all the questions, like Mike Davis. Really tried to steer folks away from Mike Davis. Of course, that led to CPAT, right? We didn't know that CPAT was going to be doing what he's doing. But I mean, the list goes on, right, of these backs that were in the Miles Sanders was really a big avoid for me. David Montgomery ended up putting it together at the end of the year. James Robinson was an avoid for me. Miles Gaskin was an avoid. And the reason why is there's just these receivers that were taken in the first round this year, 2 years, 3 years ago that you could get in those same rounds. And so you just knew the talent was there, and you knew it was just an opportunity to kind of get around some of the injury issues and some of the cloudy murky backfield situations that ultimately did play out to be frustrating.
By the time August came around, we literally had, I think, our 16 or 17 RBs that we were like, these are reasonable guys you can be drafting in the first 3 rounds, but after that, stay the hell away. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think that was, and we'll see what ADP shapes up to be, this next year. Each year is kind of its own living organism. Every draft's its own living organism. But looking at, what ADP looks like will be a big factor. Other things, just fading Elliott, fading Henry. Not that you're ever going to be like happy about running back injuries, but they were just both so high in their touches that it was just really a calculated, gamble, honestly, on my part to avoid them, just because I knew they carried more injury risk. Now, looking at it now, hindsight, it's like, well, what running back didn't get hurt that we took in the first round? So it's not necessarily, that I was just trying to fade everyone. There were other backs I was taking that maybe I should have been fading, but with Elliott and with Henry and then with Chubb, I was just staying away from Chubb really just because of Kareem Hunt. And so Chubb's an interesting one, Ian. Like, he's really the same thing almost as Jonathan Taylor. He's got a pain in the ass backfield mate, but where it's different is Kareem Hunt is on a whole nother level than Nyheim Hines, right? Kareem Hunt could actually be a lead back somewhere else. And so with Chubb, like, he was a fade for me, but it's the same logic we use in a way that kept me from drafting Jonathan Taylor, also helped me appropriately get away from Nick Chubb and focus on Justin Jefferson, guys like that, in the second round. Generally speaking, I stayed away from players like Julio, older guys, and I just think that's always a fine strategy, especially right now at receiver with so many young guys that are in the league that were available in those mid rounds. And I think the other thing folks have just got to get used to, Ian, like, the industry's changing. We have younger players that are more aggressive, that are willing to do things that maybe, a lot of the people you used to draft against, didn't want to do. Like taking Jamar Chase at one point this offseason was a 4th round pick. And he
was like
moved
the
down
highest
to 6.
rookie. I think it was Jared Smola from Draft Sharks was saying it was literally the highest rookie ADP we've ever seen.
Yes,
for a wide receiver.
It beat, what we had seen from Julio Jones and A.J. Green back in the day. And then if you look at it, it ended up being one of the best values. He started off as a 4th rounder, ended up being more of a 5th or 6th rounder because there was all the stuff, he can't catch the ball because it doesn't have the stripes on it, which turned out to be great because that allowed me to get way more exposure to him over late in the draft season. As that caught going, I was really able to hammer home on Jamar Chase in a lot of drafts, which was great, and hopefully lead a lot of folks to go ahead and draft him as well. So good things, again, like Jefferson, the rookies, Jalen Waddle, you already mentioned, but he's my most drafted player, so I was excited about him. Had him ranked really high, so hopefully a lot of people got to draft him. Bad. Jonathan Taylor, we already mentioned. I was too high on Aaron Jones. Here's one, Ian, that I want us to dissect more, but Leonard Fournette. I had him way too low in my ranks. I had him below the PFF consensus by 40 spots. I was basically saying, no way should you ever touch Leonard Fournette. And the way I'm looking at this one, it's a great offense with the Bucs, and you have a former 1st-round pick. Yes, is it going to start off as a committee? Probably. But again, lean into the talent more often than not. You got a good offense and let things play out. You may not be able to use Leonard Fournette early in the year, but if you can get him in the 8th, 9th, 10th round, which is where he was going this year, I should have gotten exposure to Leonard Fournette at least in the drafts where he was falling in the 9th to 10th round. And not to make this about me and my drafts, but the best, I'm a player before I'm a writer, before I'm anything in fantasy. What made me interested in coming to PFF is I just love to play fantasy football. I play in a lot of leagues. And so hopefully when folks hear me talk like this, it's not, this is about Dwain's show. It's the best way I know how to explain it is I'm actually, the advice I give to you guys, is the actual advice I use to draft. I'm giving you how I draft my teams, not just a list to give you a list. My ranks, the way I create them, I'm basically trying to put them in an order where you're forced into situations whenever it comes to your turn that there's certain guys that you just can't avoid. You're going to have to take them because I've got them ahead of the pack by so much. And then vice versa, guys that I rank so low, I may even rank them a little lower than what my projections say, just so you'll steer clear of them based on the other value you could be getting right at that time. So there's a lot of process, that I put behind the way, that I order my guys in the ranks because I really want to help you ultimately have the best draft. And I spent a lot of time drafting and then writing about my drafts. So hopefully that helps you guys. But as far as the bad, Trey Sermon, man.
Real quick, Dwayne.
Go, Ian, go. Sorry.
Because I was off on Fournette as well, and based on what you're saying, kind of my own thoughts as well, obviously. But I think the one thing that we were both, and I think probably everyone out there, is kind of missing from our season-long process is not putting enough weight on that potential best-case scenario. Because I think we do a decent job of it in the season. We have floor and ceiling projections to go along with our median projections, but it just always ranks. There's never really been a process where we're paying super close attention to a guy's ceiling. I think that's kind of baked into the rank, but it's not exactly we're never looking at Leonard Fournette, because if we were looking at him as, what was he, a low mid-tier RB3. So all it said on our ranks is Leonard Fournette RB33. It didn't give the fact that, hey, if Rojo and Giovanni Bernard aren't that involved, Leonard Fournette could be a top 5 RB like he was this year. So I think, again, really focusing more on that best case scenario and what these guys' ceiling could be is going to be really important moving forward. And I think trying to reference that really often as we're going through it could help. And then also, to your point about talent, we preach volume. But yes, talent should be a tiebreaker. And I think finding a way to quantify that is possible. Now, it's not going to be perfect, but it's better than our current process, which is I think that guy's pretty good. But by using, missed tackles and contested catch rates and some of these things that, might be a little bit volatile from year to year, but just getting a rough idea of a talent score, I think could help us make some of these decisions. So adding on to everything you're saying. I don't know if you got
to see my ranks this year if you went and looked at my actual articles that I posted. But that's essentially what I did. I projected their utilization, and then I had talent scores. And so I used key metrics across each position for talent. Because, look, it's really what it is. It's the crossroads of where talent and opportunity meet. You could argue there's a third really phase, which is the quality of the opportunity, right? You could get a ton of carries and be a good running back on the Jets, and you could still struggle because the team sucks, right?
Right.
So there's quality of opportunity, there's the volume of opportunity, and then there's the talent. And where those things intersect, is ultimately how I create, my tiers now, right? So if you check off opportunity and talent and the quality of opportunity, you're a tier 1 player. If you check off opportunity, we know you're going to be the bell cow back, but your talent is a little less, like you're probably in tier 2. You're a really talented player that we've got questions around your volume, you're tier 3, right? Yeah. So, but where I agree, obviously I agree. I mean, that's kind of the process that I try to use now, but where I need to fine tune and what we could, really think of this is like us just like brainstorming here on the air, but I think people like this. So like figuring out like, how do we better tier those players, right? How do we better tier some of those players, like you mentioned, with uncertainty, truly working through what does that best case scenario look like? Because I do a range of outcomes for every player as well. But again, obviously it's not good enough because I freaking missed on Jonathan Taylor. So like my process totally has to improve. I think Javonte Williams is a great example, as well. I think the process behind Javonte Williams for folks that were taking him in the 5th or 6th round of drafts, it didn't work out. But I think it was probably right. I don't think Javonte Williams was a bad 5th or 6th round pick looking back at it.
He didn't kill your squad. I know he didn't win
kill
the league.
But he didn't do what people hoped, right? Which was take over the backfield by like week 8.
Yeah. Very, very true. All right.
And it also depends like on the players that are there with them, right? I mean, Melvin Gordon is not your typical, in the way kind of back, right? People tend to think he's washed, but he's not. So it also is quality of competition in your backfield and weighting those things. So,
and that's, I think you can call it, it's not a win, but, I had so many arguments this whole offseason about why I valued Raheem Mostert over Trey Sermon. Now 2 carries into the year, Raheem Mostert got freaking obviously injured and done. I understand the injury prone narrative was a lot of people's reasoning with that, but we can't assume that rookie running backs are just going to immediately take over the incumbent starter. And even though it wasn't Mostert, we did see that come to fruition with Trey Sermon and Elijah Mitchell.
Right. And some of our other test cases we just didn't get to see because Travis Etienne got hurt right before the season started.
Cam Akers got hurt.
Yeah. So, I mean, we had a lot of injuries. But, I mean, this stuff is, historically looking back, here's what I will say. In the dead zone, I would much rather take a chance on a young back with upside than a lot of the backs that we want to avoid. If you're going to be drafting running backs in the dead zone, I think you should be aiming for upside.
Yeah, 100%. All right, man. Any other stuff you want to talk about here? I think I
think we hit on a lot of it.
Okay.
A lot of it is just more these macro things, roster construction is really what it comes down to. How do you build a squad that's going to give you the ceiling you want while also like the floor, not just being completely terrible? Because it's also more complex, right? Than like I've had some of these conversations on Twitter. Look, if you just want to go draft all young players, there's nothing new about that. Like that strategy, like I got a guy I've been drafting with for 15 years and every year, like this guy took Randy Moss in his rookie year like 7 rounds above ADP. And it paid off. Like he hit huge. This guy took Edgerrin James with the pick 1-1 one year, and it paid off huge. I saw him do the same thing with LaDainian Tomlinson his rookie year. But I've also seen multiple years where his team completely crashes and burns. Like, so it's not just a matter of only taking upside players. It's not as simple as, I'm just going to draft every young player, right? And so it's figuring out like how do we take it to that next level of really quantifying it, to your point.
And hey, as you said, man, every year is different. Every draft is different. So the RBs that were in the dead zone that we faded last year, if the entire industry gets on this and the ADP for those guys drops by 20 spots each, now all of a sudden their values at where they're going. So
that's going to happen because look, every year in fantasy, like I've been doing this long enough, it's a copycat, just like the NFL. Next year, you're going to see more zero running back than you've ever seen. You're going to see more receivers go in the first round. You're going to see a ton of receivers go in the first 2 rounds, and you're going to see running backs get pushed down the board, right? So the dead zone is going to get pushed. It started happening this year. Towards the end of draft season, like it was already happening in 2021. If you drafted a team in June and then you drafted a team in August, like the ADP was a significant bump down for these backs. And it was the right thought process. It was to bump these guys down. And just people, like I said, are getting sharper. There's more and more resources out there that people can read, right? There's a lot of smart folks thinking about this stuff. So we'll be on it. I can't wait. I'm honestly, like, I love the season. But I get a full off season with PFF now, and with you and the rest of the guys, and I'm stoked like for what we're going to come up with.
I am as well, my friend. First of 100 times I'll say this all season, and as always, We don't hate players. We just hate ADPs, and we will continue to adjust the ranks accordingly. And also, want to note that you can get 25% off any PFF subscription if you use code FANTASY. All that locked article content, betting dashboards, player prop tools, grades, all that and so much more. If you want to get your hands on some of the research that Dwain and I will be pumping out all off season long, go ahead, support the pod and use promo code FANTASY for 25% off any subscription. And also want to give a shout out to our friends over at Manscaped. Cheers to 2022 and resolutions you can actually keep. How about upgrading your grooming routine for the new year? Our sponsors at Manscaped are here to make the ball drop into 2022 and making it the cleanest ever. Set your first New Year's resolution with good intentions and join the 4 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with our exclusive offer. Go to manscaped.com and use code PFF for 20% off and free shipping. Again, it's 20% off and free shipping with the code PFF at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com and use code PFF. It's new year, new me in 2022 with Manscaped. Also invite you guys to head on over to DraftKings where you can download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Use promo code PFF. Bet just $5 on any football team, college or pro, and win $200 in free bets if they're victorious. That's promo code PFF this week at DraftKings Sportsbook. Must be 21 or older. New Jersey, Indiana, Pennsylvania. New customers only. Minimum $5 deposit, $1 wager, one per customer. Supplies, checks.com store details. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. And finally, always love this deal. Our friends over at Western Southern are hooking you up. All you got to do is ask a question to Chris Collinsworth at westernsouthern.com/askchris, and they will cover your catering if you win up to $2,500 for the Super Bowl coordinator order from a restaurant near you, and they will have it delivered on February 13, 2022. You can hear the answers on the Chris Collinsworth podcast and Western Southern's Instagram. Again, you can ask those at westernsouthern.com/askchris. If you're watching on YouTube, check out the link in the description below. And remember, with Western Southern, you can rest assured on game day. Dwain, here we are, first off-season podcast. It was like, all right, great. Got this time. We don't need to really jam-pack pods anymore. And I think we're pushing like an hour, 40 minutes. We like to talk football, man. I'm not going to apologize for that.
No, man. And look, we're just excited. Like it's like, you know, as much as we love football and I want the season, like I just wish the season was always here. Like now it's like we get to take a step back. Like what are the lessons learned? All that kind of stuff. Like that's what gets me jazzed. Like I love to always constantly be trying to improve and figuring out how we can help others. So I think it's just our excitement. Like I think we share that and it's just coming through.
And, you know, I do have a lot of people in the industry coming up, ask me, hey, Ian, how do you just general advice, which is great. You should ask people in whatever industry you're doing advice for how to be good if you think that they're doing good in it. And my answer is always the same. Keep writing, keep working, because if you keep doing this 365 days a year, you're going to outperform the people that do silly things like look at basketball and baseball during the off season. So just something to keep in mind there. There are always going to be more questions to ask about football, both from a real life and fantasy perspective. Best way to get better at anything is by doing it more often. So we'll continue to do that right here on the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. For Dwain, I'm Ian. Thanks so much for tuning in. Until next time, take care, everybody.